The loosing was already 3 minutes old when Thanel Ossier understood that the numbers on his glass were lying to him. They were not lying. He would learn that later, in the way a man learns the floor is real only after it has broken his hands. But in the 3rd minute he stood at the observation rail of Chamber 9, watching the readouts crawl up the inside of the dome, and every instinct his training had given him said the numbers were wrong, because the numbers said the human was still alive. She should not have been. That was the entire architecture of the morning. Curator Holth had briefed it himself, standing under the cold blue of the ceiling panels with his long pale hands folded, and Holth did not brief anything he was not certain of. The agent went in. The agent found the human. The human ended. That was the sentence, spoken in the flat liturgical cadence the curator used for everything, and no one on the program had ever heard the sentence broken. Thanel watched the sentence refuse to end. Below the rail, past the 2nd wall of glass and the 3rd wall of nothing, the chamber held a single chair and a single occupant. The chair was not a restraint chair. That had surprised him the first day. The consortium did not restrain its subjects. Restraint implied a subject strong enough to require it, and the consortium's entire posture toward the deathworld species was that they required nothing, that they were animals with a dangerous reputation and thin actual walls. So the human sat in an ordinary seat, wrists loose on the armrests, and breathed the loosed air, and did not die. "Confirm the count," Thanel said. The junior beside him, a pale, narrow attendant named Irish who had been assigned to the program 11 days ago, and had not yet stopped flinching at the sealed doors, read the count aloud. The loosing had gone to full saturation. The chamber atmosphere was carrying the agent at the density the models called total, a density at which, in every prior trial on every prior body, the model animal had already stopped moving. Irish read the density, and then read the human's vital band, and then stopped reading, because the two readings did not belong in the same room. "She's metabolizing it," Irish said, and his scent glands opened without his permission, spilling the sharp green panic note into the recycled air of the gallery. "Attending. She's metabolizing it." "No," Thanel said, "nothing metabolizes it. That is the point of it." He said it because it was true, and because saying true things was the only handhold he had ever trusted. The agent had been built across 9 years for exactly one property, that no living chemistry could take it apart. It was designed to be a key with no lock, a poison the body could not learn, and the whole terrible elegance of the program had been that a species could not adapt to a thing it could not touch. That was Holth's word for it. Untouchable. He had said it the way other men said holy. The human touched it. She did not know she was touching it. Thanel understood that much. She sat in the ordinary chair in her ordinary skin, and whatever was happening below the floor of her awareness. In the wet red dark she carried around inside her like every deathworld animal carried its private furnace. But the glass did not care whether she knew. The glass only reported. And the glass reported in the 3rd minute and then the 4th, that the density of the agent in the chamber air was falling. It should not have been falling. It had nowhere to fall to. The chamber was sealed to a standard the consortium reserved for the unthinkable. Nothing left it, nothing entered. The loosing was a closed accounting. If the density was falling, the agent was going somewhere. And there was only one somewhere in the room. She was taking it into herself, and it was not coming back out. Thanel had been a pathologist for 30 years by the consortium's long reckoning, and he had built his life on a single quiet confidence, that he could look at a dying thing and name the mechanism of its dying. It was the confidence of his whole species, distilled into one man. The Sethier had beaten death the way they had beaten everything, by refusing to be in the room with it, by sealing, filtering, culling, cleaning, until their worlds were so free of the wild that a child could live a full life and never meet a single organism that had not been catalogued and permitted. He had been raised inside that cleanliness. He had never in his life had a fever. He did not, in the fullest sense, own an immune system worth the name. His people had traded theirs away over 40,000 years of perfect containment, the way a man who never walks will trade away his legs. They did not need to fight sickness. They had simply arranged never to be sick. And here, 3 walls down, sat a thing that fought. "Curator on the gallery," Irish said, and Thanel felt the air change before he turned, felt the others along the rail draw their scent in tight and go still, the way the whole station went still when Halth entered a space he intended to own. Asin Halth was old even by the reckoning of a long-lived people, and he wore his age the way the oldest glass wears it, gone faintly cloudy at the edges without ever losing its hardness. He was taller than any of them, and thinner, his skin so pale and so fine that in the blue ceiling light you could see the dark architecture of him moving underneath, the slow pump and shift of a body kept alive far past its intended term by the same sterile arts he had spent his life perfecting. He did not hurry. He had never once, in Thanel's presence, hurried. He came to the rail and looked down at the chair and the human in it, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he said, "Read me the density." Thanel read it. Halth listened without moving. When the number was out in the air between them, the curator tilted his long head a fraction, the gesture his people used for mild interest, the gesture a scholar gives a specimen that has done something faintly novel before it dies. "It is slower than the model," Halth said. "Deathworld tissue. It has more mass to saturate. Give it the 9th minute." "Curator," Thanel said, "the density is falling." Halth's head came around. In 30 years Thanel had learned to read the small weather of that face, the way a farmer reads a sky, and what crossed it now was not fear, because Halth did not own fear any more than he owned an immune system. It was something colder and more dangerous, the flicker of a man encountering, for the first time in a very long life, a fact he had not authored. "Falling," Halth repeated. "Into her," Thanel said. "It is not leaving the chamber, it is leaving the air." Below them the human shifted in the ordinary chair. She lifted one hand off the armrest and looked at it, turning it over, the way a person looks at a hand that has gone briefly numb and then come back. She could not have known what the gesture meant, but every Sethier on the gallery leaned back from the glass as if she had raised a blade. "Bring the loosing to a second saturation," Halth said. Irish's glands spilled green again. "Curator, the first saturation was total. There is no second." "There is a second," Halth said, "because I am naming one. Run it." They ran it. Thanel watched them run it, and he watched the density in the chamber climb again toward that impossible number the models called total, and he watched the human sit in the rising invisible tide of a thing built to be untouchable, and he watched her, in the 7th minute and the 8th, simply keep breathing. Slowly. Evenly. The way a person breathes who has decided, somewhere below decision, that breathing is a thing she intends to go on doing regardless of the opinion of the air. And the second saturation began to fall too. Thanel had grown up on a clean world. He wanted the reader of his own thoughts to understand what that meant, because everything that came after depended on it. He had never seen mud. He had seen images of mud in the Hazard archives, the way a consortium child sees images of everything wild and forbidden, mud and rot, and the boiling green tangle of a biosphere that had never been brought to heel. He had been taught to feel about those images the way other species taught their young to feel about open flame or open vacuum. Not hatred, which was too warm a thing, but a deep clean revulsion, a certainty in the marrow of his glass bones that life left unmanaged was the one true obscenity in the ordered dark. The deathworlds were the worst of it. The Hazard schema the consortium used to sort biospheres ran on an old cold scale they called the order of attrition. How fast a world would take a clean thing and unmake it, how quickly the wild would find the seams of anything sterile and force them open. Most catalogued worlds sat low on the order. A survey team could walk a low-order world in soft suits and come home and be decontaminated in an afternoon. The high orders were another matter. The high orders were where the consortium sent no one and claimed nothing. and drew a black boundary on the star charts, and taught the black boundary to their children as the edge of the permissible universe. Earth sat at hazard order 9. It was the highest number the schema had ever needed. For most of the consortium's history, the number had been theoretical, a worst-case placeholder, a ceiling no real world was expected to reach, until a survey drone came back from a small blue world under a yellow sun with readings that broke the instrument, a world so dense with wild competing life that the drone's sterile hull had grown a skin of the world's organisms in the 11 hours it sat on the ground, a world where, the surveyors reported in flat horror, the very soil was at war with itself and had been for 4,000 million years, every handful of it a battlefield older than the consortium's oldest record, and the things that lived there did not live in spite of the war. They lived because of it. They were the war. They were what the war had made. Hazard Order 9. And the animals that had crawled up out of that 4-billion-year war and stood upright and looked at the stars were the humans. The consortium had done what the consortium always did with an obscenity it could not clean. It had drawn the black line and turned away. For a long time turning away had been enough. And then the humans had begun to move, not as a fleet, not as an army, nothing so simple that the consortium's warships could have met it at a border. They had begun to move the way their whole world moved, the way everything from a hazard order world moved, outward into every seam, into every empty niche, carrying with them, without malice, without even noticing, the whole boiling freight of their biosphere. They did not conquer clean worlds. They arrived on them and breathed on them and walked their ordinary walk, and within a season the clean world was no longer clean, and could not be made clean again, and had to be given up. That was the wound at the center of Asin-Halth, and Thanel had only pieced it together slowly from the shape of the man's silences. The consortium had lost a world, not to war, to contact. A small pale colony under a consortium sky, one of the clean worlds, given away to the wild simply because a human transport had put down there in distress and been, in the consortium's mercy, allowed to stay 11 days before it lifted again. 11 days. And the colony's sealed order had begun, quietly from the soil up, to come apart, and there had been no fighting it because you cannot fight a thing you cannot touch. And within 2 years the clean world had joined the black boundary on the charts, forbidden, contaminated, lost, not killed. That was the part that turned in Halth like a splinter, not killed but made too alive to keep. Halth had been the colony's steward. He had watched 40,000 years of his people's cleanliness undone by an animal that had not even meant to do it, that had thanked him, in its ugly barking language, for the shelter, as it breathed its furnace world breath over everything he loved. And so he had built Quietus. Thanel understood the program's logic. He had spent 9 years inside it. If the humans could not be met at a border and could not be cleaned once they arrived, and carried unmaking in their very breath, then there was only one clean solution, and it was the solution the consortium had always reached for in the end. You did not fight the wild. You removed the ground it grew from. Quietus was an agent tuned across 9 years to a single chemistry, the deep shared chemistry that every human carried, the furnace signature of Hazard Order 9, and it was built to be, in Halth's word, untouchable, a key with no lock, a thing the human body could not learn to take apart because nothing in 4 billion years of that body's war had ever been shaped like it. Loose it quietly in the seams the humans themselves had opened, and the source of the contamination would go out. Not violently, not visibly, quietly, the way you closed a valve, and the clean worlds would stay clean and the black boundary would hold, and the obscenity at Hazard Order 9 would become, in a generation, a thing the consortium's children knew only as a placeholder again. That was the program, and the program required one thing before it could be loosed on a world: proof. Proof that the untouchable agent did, in fact, end a human. You did not close a valve on a civilization on the strength of a model. Halth was old and cold and certain, but he was not careless. Carelessness was a warm-world sin. So they had gone into the seams quietly and taken one human, a young one, a solitary one, from the edge of a fire on the night side of the blue world, a human whose absence would read as one more animal lost to the furnace it lived in. And they had brought her up the long dark to the isolate, the sealed station that existed for no other purpose, and they had put her in the ordinary chair, and they had loosed the untouchable thing. And she was taking it into herself, in the 8th minute and the 9th, and she was not coming apart. "Curator," Thanel said quietly, so that only Halth would hear it under the rising green panicking of the gallery. "It is going into her, and it is not doing anything. She is fielding it." "Nothing fields it," Halth said. But he did not say it the way he had said it an hour before. There was a hairline in the certainty now, and Thanel, who had spent 30 years listening to death and its excuses, heard the hairline the way he would have heard a crack run through a load-bearing pane. Below them the human named, they had a designation for her, a specimen string, but Thanel had read the intake, and the intake had carried her own word for herself, the barking human syllable, and the syllable had lodged in him and would not leave. The human named Wren lifted her head. She looked up, past the second wall of glass and the third wall of nothing, up at the pale row of faces along the gallery rail. She could not have seen them clearly through the layered glass and the blue glare. But she found the rail, and she found, with the uncanny animal accuracy of her kind, the exact place where Halth stood, and she looked at him. She did not look afraid. That was the thing Thanel could not put down afterward, the thing he carried out of Chamber 9 and could not decontaminate. Every model animal the program had ever run had died afraid. Fear was the last honest reading, the body's final report before the silence. The human looked up at the row of the people who had stolen her out of her fire and sealed her in the dark and loosed an untouchable death into her air, and her face held none of it. It held something the consortium had no clean word for. If Thanel had been forced to name it in the private dark of his own glass skull, he would have said, "She looked like a person doing sums, like a person who had been handed a problem and had begun, without heat, without haste, to work it." Then she spoke. The chamber carried sound up to the gallery on a one-way channel, and her voice came through it flat and low, and entirely without tremor, in the barking human tongue that the station's translators rendered a half-beat late into the consortium's cold, scentless speech. "You're going to want to write this part down," the human said. And the density in the chamber kept falling, and Asin Halth, for the first time in the 30 years Thanel had known him, said nothing at all. They took the chamber down that night, not opened it. That was unthinkable, but stood the loosing down, drew the agent back out of the air through the sealed reclaim, and let the density fall to the machine's idea of zero. Halth ordered it in the flat voice, and the flat voice was the only sign that anything had moved in him, because the flat voice had gone a half-degree flatter, the way water goes still before it takes on ice. Thanel stayed at the rail after the others filed out. He told himself it was procedure, that a stood-down chamber required an attending on the gallery until the reclaim confirmed, and that was true, but it was not why he stayed. He stayed because the human was still looking up. She had not moved much. She had put her hand back on the armrest. She sat in the ordinary chair in the chamber that had just tried twice to unmake her, and she watched the empty rail where the pale faces had been, and Thanel had the disordered sense, a warm-world sense, an obscene sense. He would have been reprimanded for entertaining it, that she was not the one being observed. He keyed the one-way channel to two-way. It was a small violation. The protocol did not forbid speaking to a specimen. The protocol simply had never imagined an attending would want to. He wanted to. He told himself it was data gathering. "You are not in distress," he said. The translator carried his scentless words down into the chamber as sound, and he watched the human's head tilt, tracking the source, finding the small speaker grill set in the glass. "No," the human said. "You should be." He said it plainly because plainness was his handhold. The thing you have been breathing is the most refined lethality my people have ever built. It was made across 9 years for one purpose, and the purpose was you. Not you, your kind. It was made to be a poison your body could not learn, and your body is learning it. The human considered this. She had a way of considering that Thanel had already begun, against every discipline, to find restful, a total absence of the frantic negotiating that the cornered always did, the bargaining, the pleading, the sudden theology. She simply weighed the sentence and said it where it went. "That tracks," she said. "It does not track," Thanel said. "It is the opposite of everything I know." "Sure," she rolled her shoulder, the joint of it a small animal maintenance. "But you built a poison for a body you've never actually had to live inside, so." She left it there the way she left most things there, an equation with the last step assumed. "You made a key with no lock, but I'm not a lock, I'm a fire. You don't pick a fire, you feed it." Thanel stood very still on the gallery. "What is your function?" he said at last. "Among your kind, your work." "I put out fires," the human said, "and I keep people alive long enough to get them somewhere better. That's the whole job. Stay calm, read the situation, don't waste motion." She looked up at him, or at the grill that stood for him. "It's a good job for this." He did not answer that. He stood down the chamber, and he logged the confirm, and he went to his cell in the clean, pale halls of the isolate, and he did not sleep, because the Sethier did not sleep the way warm things slept, but he lay in the filtered dark, and he did what he had told the human he wanted to do. He wrote it down. Curator Holth summoned the program at the first light cycle. There was no light on the isolate, only the schema of a light cycle kept for the sake of order, the blue panels warming a half-shade toward white to say morning to bodies that no longer needed telling. The program gathered in the high room under the dome, the 12 of them who mattered and the 30 who did not, and Holth stood at the head of the long, pale table and did not sit. "The agent performs," he said. "Understand that first. In every metric of its design it performs, it saturates, it persists. It is untouchable, no chemistry the models predicted can take it apart." He let that stand. "The specimen is an anomaly. Anomalies are not defeats. Anomalies are data we did not yet own. We will own it." Thanel watched the room take the words in and steady on them, the way a listing ship steadies on ballast. This was the curator's true gift, the thing that had carried him past every other steward of his generation. He could make a wall out of a sentence. The green panic scent that had filled the gallery the day before thinned in the high room and was gone. They were scholars. He had handed them a problem, and a problem was a thing they knew how to love. "We proceed on 3 lines, Holth said. "First, we characterize the specimen's response. Ossier." His cloudy eyes found Thanel. "You will map what her body is doing with the agent. I want the mechanism. Nothing in the wild is untouchable to her. Very well. Then she has a hand we have not seen. Show me the hand." "Curator," Thanel said, and inclined his head. "Second, we escalate. If the untouchable agent is being fielded, we will present her with more than she can field. There is a saturation her mass cannot exceed. We will find it." Holth's long fingers spread flat on the pale table. "Third, and this is Vayen's line, we consider the possibility that the specimen is not fielding the agent at all but sequestering it, storing it, in which case she is not surviving the loosing. She is merely deferring it, and the deferral has a floor, and when she reaches the floor she will go down all at once. Vayen." Thanel had not known Vayen was on the station. That was Holth's way. He moved his pieces in the dark and revealed them placed. The immunist came forward from the far end of the room, and Thanel felt the small institutional cold of recognizing a rival before he had recognized the face, Sar Vayen, who had built her long reputation on the study of the very thing the Sethier had thrown away, the immune arts of the wild species, the messy self-defending chemistries that the consortium had abandoned, and Vayen had spent a career refusing to look away from. She was younger than Thanel and harder than Holth, and she wore the particular arrogance of the specialist who has been right when everyone found her distasteful. The specimen is not sequestering, Vayan said without preamble, which told Thanel she and Halth had already thought about it. That is the comfortable reading, and it is wrong. I have watched the chamber logs. Sequestration would show a rising internal burden and a flat response. That is not what her body is doing. She let the room lean in. Her body is not storing the agent. Her body is reading it. And a wild body that reads a thing does not defer it. It answers it. Answers it how? Halth said. And there was the hairline again, so fine that only a man who had listened to Halth for 30 years would have caught it. I don't know yet, Vayan said. That is the honest answer, and you should all be more frightened of it than of any answer I could invent. She looked around the pale table at the scholars who had beaten death by never being in the room with it. None of you have ever been sick. I want that said aloud, because it is the flaw in this program that no model will show you. You built an untouchable poison, and you are proud of it, and it is a genuine marvel, but you built it for a body you have never inhabited. You have never once felt your own flesh take a foreign thing apart. She does it in her sleep. She has done it since before she could walk. Her kind spent 4 billion years in a war we have never fought for a single hour of our lives, and we have decided, on the strength of 9 years of very clean work, that we understand the enemy that war produced. She folded her 4 long hands. I would like the record to show that I think we have made a category error, and I would like to be told I am wrong. Please, tell me I am wrong. No one told her she was wrong. Halth let the silence go on exactly as long as it served him, and then he ended it. You are cautious, Vayan. Caution is why you are here. Map the answer. If she is answering the agent, I want to know what the answer is made of, and I want to know whether the answer has a limit. He straightened to his full pale height. Everything has a limit. That is the first clean law. We will find hers. They went to find it. Thanel's line was the mechanism, and so Thanel spent the next 3 light cycles closer to the human than any Sethier had willingly been to a hazard order body in the history of the program. Closer than the glass, in a sense. He sat in the analysis vault with the chamber's take spread across every pane, the slow, patient accounting of what her body did with what they gave it, and he watched, and he did not understand. And then slowly he began to understand, and understanding was worse. He had expected, the whole program had expected, that the human survival would prove to be a kind of toughness. That was the consortium's model of the deathworlds: brute redundancy, thick walls, a body so overbuilt that it could absorb a killing thing the way a stone absorbs a blow. That was survivable. A stone had a limit. You struck a stone hard enough and it broke, and Halth's second line, the escalation, was built on the faith that the human was a very hard stone, and they had merely not yet struck hard enough. She was not a stone. Thanel saw it in the vault on the second cycle, and his glands closed tight against his own will. A stone did not change. A stone that survived a blow was, after the blow, exactly the stone it had been. The human, after the loosing, was not the human she had been before the loosing. Her body had taken the untouchable thing in, and had not broken under it, and had not stored it, and had not passed it. Her body had opened the thing up. Somewhere in the red furnace dark of her, in the 4 billion year machinery she carried around and paid no attention to, her flesh had done the one thing the entire program was founded on the impossibility of. It had learned the shape of the untouchable key. And having learned the shape, it had begun, quietly, without her knowing, without any heat at all, to do what a wild body did with every shape it learned. It had begun to make the counter to it, and it had not stopped at the counter. Thanel sat in the analysis vault and looked at what the human's body was building out of the thing they had loosed to kill her, and he understood, in a slow, cold cascade, that Vayan had been generous. A category error. It was worse than a category error. They had brought the most refined lethality their people had ever built, and they had put it inside the one kind of body in the catalogued universe that treated lethality not as a death, but as a design, as raw material, as instruction, as a thing to be taken apart and understood, and then answered with something the enemy had never seen. Her body was not surviving quietus. Her body was studying it. Her body was, in the only word Thanel could find, and the word appalled him: manufacturing. He carried the finding to the vault's log, and he sat with it for a long time before he spoke it into the record, because he knew that once it was in the record it would reach Halth, and he did not know what Halth would do with a fact this size. In the end he spoke it plainly, because plainness was all he had. "The specimen is not resisting the agent," he said to the log. "The specimen is reverse engineering it. Her body has taken our untouchable key and is using it as a template. She is not the lock, she is the workshop, and I do not yet see in any of the readings the place where the workshop is supposed to stop." He shut the log. In the chamber below, on the pane that never went dark, the human named Wren sat in the ordinary chair with her eyes closed, resting, the way a person rests between tasks, and the machinery of 4 billion years worked inside her while she paid it no attention at all. Halth read the finding and ordered the escalation the same cycle. He did not summon Thanel to argue it. That was the curator's answer to a fact he did not like. He did not argue with it, he outran it. If the human's body was a workshop, then the escalation would flood the workshop with more raw material than it could ever work, bury the learning under the sheer weight of the thing to be learned. It was, Thanel thought, watching the order come down, the logic of a man throwing water at a grease fire because water had put out every other fire he had ever seen. He had tried to say as much once in the high room. Halth had looked at him with the mild, cloudy interest he gave a specimen and had said, "You have caught the deathworld habit, Ossier. You have begun to speak of it as though it were clever. It is not clever. It is only wet." And the room had rustled its agreement, because the room needed the human to be only wet, and Thanel had sat down. They loosed the third saturation at a density the models had no name for, a density that in every prior body would have been a grotesque redundancy, a killing done 9 times over. Thanel stood the gallery for it because Halth wanted him there, wanted the pathologist's eye on the escalation. And so Thanel watched them pour into the sealed chamber a quantity of untouchable death that his whole training told him was obscene, and he watched the human breathe it. She had asked that morning for water. The intake staff had nearly refused. There was no protocol for a specimen's request. The protocol had never imagined one. And then Vayan had overruled them, on the cold logic that a dehydrated workshop was a poor test, and so they had passed a sealed bulb of water through the reclaim lock into the chamber, and the human drank it in the ordinary chair while the third saturation climbed around her. And she set the empty bulb on the floor by her foot with a small precision that Thanel found he could not look away from. She lined it up. She squared it to the edge of the tile, a person tidying a workspace. "Density holding at the new ceiling," Irish read. His glands had learned over the cycles to stay closed. The young ones adapted fastest, and the young ones frightened Thanel most, because he could see them building the calluses that would let them go on doing this. Holding, a pause, falling. It fell faster than before. That was the reading Thanel had come to dread, the reading he had known was coming and had hoped, against his own findings, not to see. The workshop was not merely surviving the escalation. The workshop was getting better at it. Each loosing taught the machinery of 4 billion years a little more of the shape it was answering, and the more it learned the faster it worked, so that the third saturation, the obscene one, the killing done 9 times over, came apart inside her faster than the first small, honest saturation had, because by the third she was no longer meeting a stranger. She was meeting a thing she had already begun to build the answer to. "Curator," Thanel said low, "the escalation is not burying the learning. The escalation is teaching it faster. Every loosing is a lesson. We are tutoring her." Halth stood at the rail with his long hands folded and watched the human square the empty water bulb to the tile. "Then we will teach her something with no answer," he said, and turned and left the gallery, and the escalation went on climbing behind him. It was Vayan who first said aloud the thing that would end them. She said it to Thanel in the analysis vault, in the low cycle when the station kept its schema of night, and the corridors were empty of everyone but the two of them and the pale patient machines. She had come to the vault to fight with him, he thought at first, the specialist's habit, the need to be right where the rival could see, but she did not fight. She stood over the panes and looked at the slow accounting of what the human's body was building, and her 4 hands hung still at her sides, and when she spoke her voice had gone somewhere Thanel had not heard it go before. "Do you know what frightens me, Osir?" she said. "It is not that she survives. I told them she would survive. I have spent my whole life among the immune arts of the wild, and I knew the moment I read the intake that an untouchable poison was a child's idea of a weapon against a body like hers." She touched the pane, one long finger tracing the shape of the thing the human was making. "What frightens me is that her body is not building a defense. A defense would stop when the threat stopped. Look at it. It is not stopping." She learned the shape of our agent, and she built the answer to it. And then she kept building. She is elaborating it, refining it, the way her kind refine everything they touch, and the thing she is refining is a thing that was designed from the ground up to be untouchable by wild chemistry. Vayan turned her head and looked at him, and her eyes in the pale light were very old. "Do you understand what that means? She has taken the one thing in the universe that our bodies cannot field, the one poison built specifically to be unfieldable, and her body has learned to make it, not to survive it, to make it. And she carries it now, inside her, a thing tuned across 9 years of our best work to be untouchable by chemistries exactly like ours." Thanel had understood it in pieces across 3 cycles. Hearing it whole, in Vayan's low voice in the empty vault, was another thing. His glands closed so hard they ached. "We are the ones with no immune system," he said. "We are the ones with no immune system," Vayan agreed. "We traded it away 40,000 years ago because we arranged never to be in the room with anything that could use it. And we have just spent 9 years building the single most refined unfieldable thing in the cataloged universe, and we have loosed it into a body that treats unfieldable things as a design brief, and we have done all of this inside a sealed station full of people who have never once in their lives taken a foreign thing apart." She let the words sit in the vault. "She is not the specimen, Osir. We are. We are the fragile thing in a sealed box with a hazard order 9 body, and we have handed that body the exact blueprint of the one weapon that could unmake us, and we have been tutoring her on how to build it, 3 saturations and counting, and we have been calling it an escalation." "She has not attacked anyone," Thanel said. It came out of him before he had decided to say it, and it surprised them both. "In all of this, understand, I have watched her every cycle. She squares her water bulb to the tile. She asks for water and rests between the loosings and does sums with her face. She has not once tried to do to us what we are trying to do to her. She is not building a weapon. She is only," he stopped, because the word that came was a warm world word and he had never in his life had cause to use it about a specimen. "She is only staying alive. The building is what her body does when it stays alive. It is not aimed at us. It is not aimed at anything. It simply happens, the way a fire simply makes heat." Vayan looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the most frightening thing anyone has said to me since I came aboard, because you are right, and it means there is no one to reason with. There is no intent to appeal to, no threat to deter, no bargain to strike. She is not our enemy, she is a fact, and the fact is loose in a sealed box, and we built the box to keep everything in." Thanel carried both of their findings to the high room the next light cycle, and he set them before the program plainly, and the program did what programs do with a fact too large to hold. It divided. Half the room went where Vayan went quietly, with their glands shut, the way frightened Sethir went anywhere. They did not say stop. A consortium scholar had no clean verb for stop. Stopping was a warm world failure of nerve. But they began to speak, carefully, of containment review, of reclaim margins, of whether the isolate seals had been rated for a specimen that generated rather than merely suffered. They began, in the flat, cold way of their kind, to be afraid of the box they stood in. The other half went where Halth went, and Halth did not divide, because Halth had made a wall of a sentence and he stood behind it. "You have all," Halth said, "allowed a single anomalous specimen to unmake 9 years of clean work in your minds. I will restore the frame." He stood at the head of the pale table under the dome, and the blue light moved in the dark architecture beneath his fine skin, and his voice did not rise because it had never once needed to. "The specimen learns. Granted. The specimen builds. Granted, I have read Osir's log, I do not dispute it, I have never disputed a true reading in my life, but you have all made the Deathworld error. You have looked at a thing that adapts and you have decided that because it adapts, it has no ceiling. Everything has a ceiling, the first clean law." He spread his fingers on the table. "She builds the answer to our agent. Very well. Then we build past her answer. She learns the shape, then we change the shape. We have 9 years of clean architecture and she has one body and one lifetime and a finite quantity of the furnace she runs on. We loose a form she has not learned. She learns it, we loose the next. We are the consortium. We have the whole schema. She has only what she can build between the loosings in one small wet body, alone in the dark. It is a race, and one of the racers is a civilization, and the other is an animal in a chair. I will not be told the animal wins the race against the civilization. I will not hear it in this room." It was, Thanel would think later, a magnificent speech. It was also the exact moment the program died, though it would take the dying a while to reach the body, the way a felled thing stands for a breath before it knows. Because Halth had named the strategy that could not work, could not, for the reason Vayan had already put into the vault and no one in the high room wanted to carry back out. Change the shape, and you taught her a new shape. Loose the next form, and you handed her the next template. Every move Halth had left to make was a move that made the workshop richer. He had built a race in which running faster only fed the thing you were racing. And he could not see it, because seeing it would have required him to have once, a single time in his long, clean life, felt his own flesh take a foreign thing apart and been changed by it. He never had. None of them had. They had beaten sickness by refusing to learn it, and now the whole of their knowing had no place to stand. Thanel looked down the pale table at Vayan, and Vayan looked back at him, and neither of them said the thing, because the thing had no clean verb. They loosed the fourth form the next cycle. A changed shape, as Halth had promised 9 years of architecture bent into something the human's body had never met. Thanel stood the gallery, because he could not make himself not stand it, and he watched them present the human with a wholly new death, and he watched her meet it, and he watched, in the low span of a single cycle, her body find the shape of the new thing and begin to answer it. She was faster on the fourth than on the third. She was faster on the fourth than on the third because she was no longer learning how to learn. She had learned that on the first. Everything after was only work. Halth changed the shape again, and again. He moved through the schema the way a proud man moves through a losing argument, each new point more elegant than the last, and each one landing on the same silence. And with every changed shape, the human's body grew richer and quicker and more terrible. And with every changed shape, the fragile pale scholars who ran the loosings stood a little farther back from the glass. Thanel kept the log. It was the only clean thing he had left, the plain, true record, and he kept it plainly, and the plainness of it became, cycle by cycle, the most frightening document on the station. On the sixth form, a technician named Ole, young, careful, one of the ones who had learned to keep his glands shut, made a small error at the reclaim lock. It was nothing. It was the kind of nothing that happened 1,000 times on a clean station and meant nothing. A seal cycled a half-beat early, a margin of the chamber's air brushing the outer lock before the reclaim had fully drawn it down. On any other station, breathing any other air, it would have been logged and forgotten. Ole logged it, and did not forget it, because that cycle Ole began to cough. The Sethir did not cough. Thanel wanted that understood with the same weight he had wanted mud understood. His people had no reflex for it. no memory of it in the body, no arts for it. Coughing was a thing that happened in the hazard archives, to warm wet things, a symptom of the obscene wild war they had opted out of 40,000 years before. When Ole began to cough in the pale corridor outside the reclaim vault, 3 technicians backed away from him before they had decided to, on an instinct older than their cleanliness. And Ole stood alone in the middle of the corridor with his hand over his scent glands, and a look of pure uncomprehending terror on his fine pale face, because his body was doing a thing his body did not know how to do, and there was no art on the station to make it stop. Vayan reached him first. She was the only one who would go near, because she was the only one who had spent a life among the immune arts of the wild and did not share the reflex to flee. She took Ole into the isolation cell that had never once been used for a Sethier, and she sealed it, and she stood outside the glass and watched the young technician's fragile body try, with no tools, no memory, no 40,000-year-old art, to field a thing it had brushed for half a beat at a reclaim lock. And Thanel stood beside her, and together they watched Ole learn, in a single terrible cycle, exactly what it was they had spent 9 years building. It was in the air of the chamber. Of course it was in the air of the chamber. The human's body had taken their untouchable agent and made the answer to it and refined the answer past the agent, and every loosing drew the chamber air back through the reclaim, and the reclaim was rated for the agent, the thing they had built, the thing they understood. It had never once been rated for the thing the human's body was quietly making out of the agent, because no one had known, when they built the reclaim, that there would be a thing the human's body was quietly making. Ole had brushed half a beat of that air, and Ole's body had no idea what to do with it. None of their bodies did. "There it is," Vayan said, very quietly watching the young technician through the glass. "There is the ceiling curator. We found it. It was ours." Ole did not survive the cycle. Thanel would set that down plainly too, because Ole deserved a plain accounting more than anyone on the station, and because the plainness of it was the only honor he had left to give. The young technician's body, which had never in its life fought anything, which had been raised on a clean world and kept clean every hour since, tried to field a thing built across 9 years to be unfieldable, and then refined past that by 4 billion years of war, and it had nothing to try with. It was not a hard death. That was the obscenity of it. It was a quiet, orderly, entirely undramatic coming apart, the exact quiet unmaking the whole program had been designed to inflict on the humans, running now in reverse, on the wrong body, behind the isolation glass. And Vayan stood outside the glass the whole time because someone should, and when it was done she keyed the log herself, because Thanel found he could not. Halth quarantined the finding before the cycle turned. He did it with the flat efficiency that had built his whole career, and Thanel watched him do it and understood, with a cold that went past fear into something like grief, that the curator was not going to stop. Halth did not deny that Ole had died. He was too rigorous for denial. Denial was a warm world evasion, and he had contempt for it. He simply reframed the death the way he reframed everything, made a wall of a sentence and stood behind it. Ole had died of a procedural failure at the reclaim lock. A margin had been brushed. Procedures existed to prevent exactly this, and the procedure had been violated, and a violated procedure was not a flaw in the program. It was a flaw in a technician, now regrettably beyond correction. Tighten the reclaim margins, re-rate the seals, reduce the personnel at the lock, and proceed. "The specimen," Halth told the high room, "is more dangerous than we modeled. I have said this from the first anomaly. A more dangerous specimen requires more discipline, not less. It does not require abandonment. Abandonment is what the deathworlds want of us. They want us to look at the furnace and step back from it, and that stepping back is how they take world after world without ever firing a shot. We will not step back. We will tighten, and we will proceed, and we will find the form she cannot answer, and we will end this program the way it was designed to end, with a proof and a clean world and the source of the contamination closed." He looked around the pale table. "The alternative is that we let one animal in a chair fright a civilization out of the only work that can save it. I have buried a world already. I will not bury another because a technician cycled a seal a half-beat early, and a room full of scholars lost their nerve at the smell of it. It was the reference to the buried world that told Thanel the curator could not be moved. He had thought, until then, that Halth's certainty was intellectual, a scholar's overcommitment to a beautiful architecture, the kind of thing a sharper fact might still crack. It was not intellectual. It was a wound with a schema built over it, and every fact that threatened the schema threatened the wound, and a man will defend a wound past the point where he will defend his own life. Halth was not trying to end humanity. Thanel saw that clearly now, and the clarity was the worst thing he had yet carried. Halth was trying to make the buried world mean something. If quietus worked, if the untouchable agent ended the human and proved out and closed the source, then the world Halth had lost had been the first casualty of a war the consortium had gone on to win, and the loss had been terrible but survivable, a wound in a story that ended clean. And if quietus failed, if the animal in the chair simply took their finest work and turned it into the instrument of their own unmaking, then the buried world had been lost for nothing, the first casualty of a war that could not be won, that had in fact already been lost the moment the humans learned to walk. Halth could not survive that second story, so he would run the first one into the ground, and everyone standing on it. Thanel went down to the chamber after the high room emptied. He did not have a reason that would have satisfied the protocol. He keyed the two-way channel and stood at the rail and looked down at the human in the ordinary chair, and she opened her eyes as if she had been waiting, though she could not have known he was coming. "One of you died," she said. It was not a question. She had a way of stating the thing she had already worked out and leaving room for him to confirm or correct, which was, Thanel realized, a mercy she was giving him the smaller job. "Out there, in the last cycle, something changed in how you all move. You've got a body missing." "A technician," Thanel said. He brushed a margin of the chamber's air. His body could not field what was in it. The human took this in with her still animal patience. "Because of me," she said. "Because of what your body is making," Thanel said. "Yes." He watched her weigh it. He had braced without admitting the brace, for the thing every model of her kind predicted, the flare of it, the warmth, the ugly triumph a cornered animal took in the suffering of the thing that had cornered it. It did not come. Her face did the sum, and the sum came out somewhere cold and level, and Thanel thought, tired. "I'm not doing it on purpose," she said. "You understand that. I want it in your—" she gestured at the grill, at the log, at the whole apparatus of the pale scholars, "in your record or wherever. I'm not making anything. I'm sitting in a chair breathing the air you keep filling with poison, and my body's doing what a body does. That's all. If your man died, it's because you built the box and you put me in it and you keep pouring the worst thing you have into the air I breathe. I didn't touch him. I've never touched any of you. I've been in this chair the whole time." She let it settle. "You keep bringing me a weapon and acting surprised when a body figures it out. That's not me winning. That's just what happens. You want it to stop. Stop bringing the weapon." "The man who runs the program will not stop," Thanel said. "No," the human agreed. "The man who runs the program never does. I've met that man on every fire I've ever worked. Different face, same man. He's the one who decides the wind isn't going to turn, because he's already told everybody the wind isn't going to turn, and turning around now would mean he was wrong in front of people." She looked up at the grill, and for a moment there was something in her flat, cold face that might, on a warmer world, have been pity. "That man gets people killed, not because he's cruel, because he'd rather bury the crew than admit the wind." Thanel stood on the gallery for a long time after she stopped speaking. Below him, the human closed her eyes again and rested between the loosings, the way she always did, squaring nothing this time because there was nothing to square, her hands loose on the arms of the ordinary chair, her body working its 4 billion-year work without her, quietly, without heat, making the answer to everything they gave it and refining the answer past the giving. They loosed the 7th form the next cycle, and the 8th the cycle after, and Thanel kept the log. The station began, in those cycles, to come apart. Not violently, nothing on the isolate was ever violent. The Sethir did not have the reflexes for it. It came apart the way their kind came apart, quietly, in withdrawals and margins, and the small failures of nerve that their language had no clean verb for and so could not quite name. Personnel requested reassignment and were refused and requested it again. The reclaim vault, where Ole had brushed the air, emptied of everyone but the machines and the 2 or 3 whom Halth could still order into it. Whole sections of the station began, without any order being given, to route themselves around Chamber 9, so that a walk that had once cut straight through the heart of the program now bent the long way around it, a wide pale curve of avoidance worn into the schema of the corridors by nothing but fear. The Sethir were fielding a threat the only way their bodies knew, by arranging not to be in the room with it. It was the reflex of 40,000 years, and it did not work, because the threat was no longer a thing you could seal away in a chamber. The threat was in the reclaim, in the margins, in the air the station breathed, riding out from the sealed heart of the program on every half-beat of imperfection, in a system that had been built with enormous care to contain something else entirely. A second technician went down on the 8th form. Then a third, not at the reclaim lock at all, but 2 sections away, in a corridor that the schema said was clean, that every instrument on the station said was clean. That was not clean because the instruments had all been calibrated to find the agent, and the thing loose in the station now was not the agent. It was the human's answer to the agent, refined past the agent, and it did not read on any pane the consortium owned, because the consortium had never in its history needed an instrument that could find a thing a hazard order body had built. They were, Vayan said in the vault, in the cold, flat voice she used now for everything, blind. They had spent their whole civilization arranging to need no immune system, and the arrangement had worked so well that they had also, without noticing, arranged to have no way of seeing the thing an immune system saw. Their eyes and their defenses had been the same organ, and they had cut it out together, 40,000 years ago, and called the cutting progress. He knows, Vayan said. They were in the vault, the 2 of them in the low cycle. She meant Halth. He knows the reclaim can't hold it. He read Ole's death the way I read it. He is not a stupid man. He is the opposite of a stupid man. He knows what is loose on his station. She turned one of her 4 hands over, a gesture Thanel had learned meant something like weighing a stone she already knew the weight of. And he is going to loose the 9th form tomorrow anyway, because the 9th form is the last elegant idea in the whole schema, and if it fails, he is out of architecture. He has run to the end of 9 years of work. The 9th form is the last card, and he would rather play it into a station that is already dying than hold it and admit there was never a hand to win. Then we stop him, Thanel said. He heard himself say it. It was the closest a Sethir of his generation could come to the warm world verb, and it cost him something structural to say it, the way it costs a load-bearing thing to bend. Vayan looked at him. With what? She said. There is no clean verb for what you are proposing, Asir. There is no procedure. The consortium built a civilization with no way to remove a steward who has decided to die at his post and take the station with him, because the consortium never imagined a steward who would. We are not a people who mutiny. We do not even have the word. She was quiet a moment. We have arranged, over 40,000 years, to need nothing that could save us. We are very good at arranging. It is the only thing we have ever truly been good at. Down in the chamber, on the pane that never went dark, the human sat in the ordinary chair and rested between the loosings. She did not know that a technician had died 2 sections away in a corridor the instruments called clean. She did not know that the station was bending its own corridors into a wide pale curve around her, or that a specialist and a pathologist stood in a vault above her reaching. For the first time in either of their long, clean lives, for a verb their language did not contain. She only sat and breathed the air they kept filling with the worst thing they had, and stayed alive, because staying alive was the whole of her job and she was very good at it, and her body did the rest without asking her, the way a fire does not ask the fuel. Thanel watched her rest, and he thought about what she had said, that she was not winning, that she had never touched them, that she had been in the chair the whole time. It was true. It was the truest thing anyone had said on the station since the first loosing. She had not lifted a hand against them. She had not built a single thing aimed at a single one of them. Every death on the station, every emptied corridor, every fragile pale body coming quietly apart behind isolation glass was the consortium's own doing, running out along the exact channels the consortium had built. Its own agent, its own reclaim, its own sealed and blind and defenseless architecture, turned on its makers by nothing more aggressive than a young woman in a chair who declined to die. The workshop, Thanel thought, keeping the plain word he had put in the log, because the plain word was the only true one. They had called her body a workshop and they had been right, and the terrible thing about the word was the part they had not thought through when they wrote it. A workshop does not attack anyone. A workshop only makes. It had been Halth who chose the weapon it would learn to make. It had been Halth who supplied the blueprint, 9 years of it, the finest unfieldable death his people had ever drawn, and fed it to the one kind of body in the universe that treated a blueprint as an invitation. She had built nothing they had not handed her. She had aimed nothing at all. And the thing she made, without heat, without intent, without ever once leaving the ordinary chair, was loose now in a sealed box full of the only people in the cataloged dark who had no way on earth to field it. Thanel keyed the log and set it down plainly, because plainness was all he had ever had, and it was almost gone. "The program has produced a weapon," he wrote. "It is the weapon the program was built to produce, an unfieldable agent, tuned across 9 years, lethal to a specific chemistry. The chemistry is ours. We built the factory. We supplied the design. We selected the one workshop capable of the manufacture, and we called it a specimen, and we sealed it in a box we could not keep. The specimen never consented to any of it and has aimed none of it, and is, by every reading I have, the least dangerous person on this station. The danger is entirely the shape of what we made. I do not expect this log to be read in time. I am keeping it anyway. It is the only clean thing left, and I would like the record to show that at least one of us wrote down what was true while it was still true." The third technician's death broke something in the middle ranks of the program that Halth could not reframe, because it had happened in a corridor the instruments called clean, and a death in a clean corridor was a death the schema could not explain, and a people who lived by the schema could not live long beside a thing the schema could not explain. They began to disobey. Not loudly, the Sethir had no loud in them, but in the small structural ways their kind refused, by developing sudden reasons to be elsewhere, by finding their reassignment requests had grown teeth, by simply not being at the reclaim lock when a loosing was called. Halth answered it the way he answered everything, by narrowing the circle of those he trusted to run the work until the circle held only the ones too junior to refuse, and the two, Thanel and Vayan, he could not do without. The station was crewed by fewer bodies every cycle, and the fewer bodies did more, and the more they did the more of the loose air they breathed, and Thanel watched the accounting eat the program from the inside, and understood that Halth had built a machine that consumed its own operators to keep running, and would go on consuming them until there was no one left to pull the last seal. Thanel went down to the chamber in the low span because he had begun to need to, in a way he did not examine. He keyed the two-way and stood at the rail. The human opened her eyes. "They gave me food this cycle," she said. There was a shallow tray on the floor by the ordinary chair, squared to the tile the way she squared everything, mostly untouched. "First time. Somebody up there decided a specimen that won't die needs feeding. Or your specialist did the math on it, a body doing this much work burns through what it's got, and a starved workshop's a slow one. She said the word workshop the way she said all their words for her, flatly, trying it on and setting it down. It's not bad whatever it is. Cold, bland, I've eaten worse standing up on worse nights. She did not eat any of it while he watched. How many now? How many what? Thanel said, though he knew. Of you, the human said, dead, since the last time I asked. You've got that new quiet on you again, the one you get when there's a body missing. So, how many? 3, Thanel said. There was no reason to lie, and he had run out of the strength lying cost. 1 at the lock, 2 since in the corridors. The last one in a place the instrument said was clean. The human took it in without heat, the way she took everything, and Thanel watched her weigh it and set it where it went, and he understood, watching her, that she had stopped some cycles ago being able to be surprised by anything his people did. She had them mapped. She had mapped them the way she had mapped the 9th form and the 8th and all the forms before, from the inside, from what they did. And the map was cold and complete, and it did not have a single warm thing in it because his people had not shown her a single warm thing to put in it. You could stop this, the human said. You, not the wind man. You're the one who keeps coming down here to look at me like I'm a problem you can't put down. So put it down. Stop pulling the seals. Stop running the loosings. Your whole program is 3 people now who will actually do the work, and you're one of them, and your specialist's another, and the third some kid too scared to say no. If the 2 of you who understand it just stopped, there's no program. It ends. Tonight. No more of you die in clean corridors. I cannot stop it, Thanel said. There is no verb for it in my language. We are not a people who mutiny. We do not have the word. The human looked at him for a long moment, and the flat cold face did the sum, and the sum came out somewhere that was almost, but not quite pity. That's the saddest thing anybody said to me in this whole box, she said. You watch 3 people die of a thing you built. You know it's going to kill more. You come down here every cycle because some part of you can't stand it. And the reason you won't stop isn't that you can't. It's that you never learned a word for stopping, so you're going to stand there and let it run until it runs out of you to feed it. She settled back in the chair. My people have that word. We've got a lot of words for it. Stop. Enough, not like this. We learned them on hillsides like the one you took me off of, watching fires eat crews that a boss wouldn't pull in time. The word for stopping is the most important word there is. You don't have it because you've never once been in a spot where you needed it and could still use it. You sealed yourselves away from every spot like that. 40,000 years. She closed her eyes. You didn't beat death, doctor. You just arranged never to be in the room where somebody has to say enough. And now you're in the room, and nobody in it has the word. Thanel carried that down into the log plainly, because it was the truest pathology anyone had spoken on the station, and none of it had come from a Sethier. And Vayan, in the vault that same low span, gave him the reading that made it worse. Because the human's body, she said, had crossed a line, the immune arts had a name for even if the consortium had thrown away the organ. It was no longer merely answering the forms they loosed. It had begun to anticipate them. It had learned so much of the shape of what the program did, 9 years of clean architecture, fed to her one loosing at a time, that her body had started building the answers to forms she had not yet met, roughing out the counters to the moves still sitting unloosed in Halth's schema, the way a thing that has learned a language well enough begins to finish the sentences of the one still speaking. She was, Vayan said, in the cold, flat voice, ahead of them now. The workshop was no longer downstream of the weapon. It had gotten upstream. And a body that was upstream of the weapon you were building was a body you could not, by any move left in the schema, ever get back in front of. He will loose the 9th anyway, Vayan said. You know he will. It is the last elegant thing in 9 years of work, and a proud man does not hold his last elegant thing. He will loose it, and it will trouble her for a cycle, and then she will close over it the way she has closed over everything, and it will be the end of the schema, and he will have nothing left to loose but the same forms again, weaker each time, into an air already thick with her answer to all of them. She was quiet. And the station will keep dying around him, one clean corridor at a time, until there is no one to pull the seal. That is where this ends, Osir. Not in a breakthrough. In an empty station and a full chamber and a man at a rail who ran out of forms before he ran out of certainty. Below them, on the pane that never went dark, the human sat in the ordinary chair with the untouched tray squared to the tile, resting between the loosings, her body working 4 billion years ahead of the finest weapon a civilization could draw. And she did not know any of it, and it did not matter that she did not know it, because knowing had never been the thing her body needed in order to win. Halth loosed the ninth form himself. He came down to the gallery to do it, which he had not done since the first cycle, and Thanel understood the gesture for what it was. A steward returning to the deck of a thing he had decided to go down with. The curator stood at the rail in the blue light with the dark architecture moving under his fine pale skin, and he gave the order in the flat liturgical cadence, and the ninth form went into the chamber, the last elegant idea in 9 years of clean work, a death shaped like nothing the human's body had yet met, drawn with all the terrible art the consortium possessed. Thanel watched the human meet it. She was slower on the ninth. He saw it and his glands closed, because slower meant it was harder, meant Halth had at last drawn a shape her body had to work at, and for one cold instant the curator's whole schema stood vindicated on the pane. The human's vital band dipped, her breathing changed, her hands tightened a fraction on the arms of the ordinary chair. For the first time since the first loosing, the thing in the air was giving her body trouble. Halth saw it too. Thanel felt the curator go still beside him, felt the old certainty gather itself for one last stand. And then the human's body found the shape of the ninth form, the way it had found the shape of the 8 before it, and began to answer it. And the answer came faster than the 8th answer had, because a body that has learned 8 things learns the 9th on the strength of all 8. And the dip in her vital band steadied and held and began, slowly, to climb back toward the flat cold line it had held through everything. "It is working," Halth said, very quietly, almost to himself. "Look, it is troubling her, it is." "It troubled her," Thanel said. "For a cycle. It will not trouble her tomorrow. You have played the last card in the schema, curator, and it bought you 1 bad cycle of her breathing. There is no 10th form. I have read the architecture. The 9th was the end of it." Halth did not answer. He stood at the rail and watched the human's vital band climb back to level, watched her body close over the 9th form the way still water closes over a dropped stone, and Thanel watched the curator watch it, and he saw the exact moment the wall Halth had made of a sentence finally failed, not dramatically, not with any warmth, but the way a pain fails, all at once and silently, a whole clear certainty going to a web of cracks in the space of a breath while it still, for the moment, holds its shape. Below them the human lifted her head, in the way she had, and found the place on the rail where Halth stood and looked at him. She had never been told which of the pale figures was the one who had built the thing that was trying to kill her. She had worked it out, the way she worked everything out, from how the others moved around him. "You're the wind man," she said. The translator carried it up flat and cold. The one who already told everybody the wind wasn't going to turn. Halth stepped to the rail. Thanel had never seen him step to a rail. He put his long pale hands on it and leaned toward the glass, toward the small ordinary figure in the chair 3 walls down, and when he spoke he keyed the 2-way himself, so that his voice would carry, and it was the first time in the whole program that the curator had deigned to speak to the specimen directly. "You do not understand what you are," Halth said. "You think you are surviving. You are not surviving. You are a factory that does not know it is a factory. Your body is manufacturing the end of my species, and you sit there and call it staying alive, and the obscenity of it, the true obscenity, is that you are not even trying. If you were an enemy I could meet you. I have met enemies, but you are worse than an enemy. You are a process. You are what your world is, wearing the shape of a person, and your world is the thing my people have spent 40,000 years arranging never to be in a room with, and I brought it into the cleanest room we ever built and set it in a chair. His voice did not rise. It never rose. But the dark architecture moved fast under his skin now, faster than Thanel had ever seen it. I buried a world for this work, a clean world, given to the wild because your kind breathed on it. I told myself the burial would mean something, and you are going to make it mean nothing. You are going to sit in that chair and stay alive and let my station die around you. And when it is done, there will be no proof, and no closed source, and no clean world saved. There will only be a small blue furnace at Hazard Order 9 that took the best we had and made it worse and handed it back, and did not even do us the dignity of hating us while it did. The human listened to all of it. She had a stillness that Thanel had stopped being able to look away from, a stillness with no fear in it and no cruelty in it, the stillness of a thing that has understood the situation completely, and has decided that the situation does not require any heat from her. You buried a world because we breathed on it, she said, and your fix for that was to build a thing to kill everyone who breathes like me, and you brought me here to test it, and now it's loose in your air and your people are dying of it and you're standing there telling me it's my fault for not dying. She let it sit. I've pulled people out of fires who set the fire themselves. Every one of them, right at the end, does what you're doing. They tell me the fire is somebody else's. It never is. You want to know what you are. You're a man who built a fire he couldn't put out in a house full of people who never learned to feel heat, and then he leaned into the flames to tell the one person in the room who knows fire that she's the one burning the place down. She looked at him, level, cold, done. Sit down, wind man. You already lost the argument with the air. You're just the last one to hear it. Halth did not sit down. He straightened at the rail slowly to his full pale height, and for a moment Thanel thought he would give an order, some last flat liturgical sentence to make a wall of. He did not. He turned from the rail without a word and left the gallery, and the way he moved as he left, steady, unhurried, upright, was the way a man moves who has stopped arguing with the fact of his own death and has only the manner of it left to arrange. The consortium found out about the isolate 3 cycles later, and it found out the way the consortium found out about everything, through the accounting. The station kept a manifest. It was a clean station, and clean stations reconciled their manifests on a schedule, personnel and consumables, and reclaim margins, all of it flowing up the long dark to the oversight nodes that watched the consortium's sealed places from a safe and sterile distance. Halth had been quarantining findings inside the station, but he had not, perhaps could not, falsify the manifest, and the manifest told a story a clever accountant could read from a great way off. Personnel logged as active who had stopped drawing rations. Reclaim margins re-rated 3 times in 9 cycles. Isolation cells cycling that had never cycled before. Consumption patterns bending the long way around a single chamber. The oversight nodes read the story and did what oversight did. They sent a relief team. Thanel learned the relief team was coming from Van, who learned it from the manifest traffic she had been quietly watching for cycles, waiting for exactly this, because the relief team was the one thing that might do what the station's own people had no verb to do. A relief team came with a warden's authority. A warden could relieve a steward. A warden could end a program. Listen to me, Vayan said in the vault, low and fast. The relief team will dock in 4 cycles. They will come aboard clean, soft-sealed, decontaminated, exactly as clean as everyone on this station was before the first loosing. And they will walk into a station where the air carries a thing no instrument they own can see, a thing built to be unfieldable and refined past unfieldable by the one body in the universe that could refine it. They will breathe it in the first corridor. And they will die of it, all of them, exactly the way Old died, and the warden's authority will die with them. And then it will be worse than before, because now the consortium will know there is a thing loose out here that killed a warden's team, and the consortium's answer to a thing it cannot clean has only ever been one thing. She held his gaze. They will burn the station. From a distance. Us, her, all of it. That is the clean solution. That is what the schema says you do with a hazard you cannot contain and cannot cleanse. You remove the ground it grows from. It is exactly the solution Holth built Quietus to be. He wanted to use it on a world. The consortium is going to use it on us. Thanel stood very still. Then we warn them, he said, the relief team. We warn them before they dock. We tell them not to come aboard clean. We tell them, he stopped. He heard the shape of what he was about to say, and it was so far outside anything a Sethier of his generation had ever said that his glands closed on it. We tell them the only way onto this station that does not end in their deaths is to come aboard the way she is on it, alive to the thing in the air, able to field it. He looked at Vayan. And there is only one source on this station of a body that can field it. There is only one workshop. She is not the danger, Vayan. She is the only cure. She is the single living thing within 100 sealed worlds that has, inside her, the answer to the thing we made, because she is the one who made the answer. If any of us are to survive what is loose in this air, it will not be by sealing her away. It will be by learning from her. And we have spent 40,000 years arranging to be a people who cannot learn from a body, because we cut out the organ that learns. Vayan looked at him for a long moment, and something moved in her old hard face. The specialist's recognition of a true thing she had circled her whole career and never quite said aloud. That, she said, is the most human thing I have ever heard a Sethier say, Ossier, and it may even be right, but it does not matter whether it is right. She turned back to the manifest traffic scrolling pale across the pane. Because Holth commands the station's transmission array, and Holth will not send that warning, and Holth will not let us send it, because that warning is a confession. To warn the relief team, we have to tell them what is loose out here and how it came to be loose, and the how is 9 years of Holth's work and a buried world and a young woman in a chair he was never authorized to take. He will let the relief team dock and die before he sends that confession up the dark. He will let the consortium burn the station before he lets it read his log. She was quiet. He would rather the whole schema close over this cleanly than have it known that the thing which broke us was the thing we built. He is not protecting himself. Understand that, or you will underestimate him to the end. He is protecting the story. The clean story, where the consortium's arts are sound and the deathworlds are only wet and the burial meant something. He will kill everyone on this station to keep that story clean. It is the only world he has left to keep clean, and he will keep it. Below them, on the pane that never went dark, the human named Ren sat in the ordinary chair and rested. 4 cycles to the relief team. 4 cycles until a clean, soft-sealed crew walked into an air that would unmake them, and a warden's authority died in a corridor, and the consortium's long, cold answer came down the dark toward a station full of the fragile, pale people who had built the fire, and the one small woman who had never once asked to be anywhere near it. She opened her eyes in the chair, as if she had felt the weight of the cycles gathering. She could not have known about the relief team. She could not have known about the warden, or the manifest, or the clean solution the schema kept for hazards it could not cleanse. But she looked up at the grill, at the whole apparatus of the pale scholars who had stolen her out of her fire, and she said, in the flat, cold voice that had not once trembled since the first loosing, "Something's coming. You've all gone quiet in that new way. Somebody up the chain finally looked at the numbers." She waited, and when no one answered, she nodded once to herself, a person confirming a reading she had already trusted. "Whatever it is, tell the ones who want to live to come talk to me. I'm the only thing on this station that knows how to be in a room with this. I've been in the room with it since day one. It's the whole reason I'm still here." She settled back in the ordinary chair. "Your wind man's going to let it kill all of you rather than knock on this glass and ask. That's the part I can't fix. That part's yours." Holth locked the transmission array the next cycle. He did it quietly, the way he did everything, folding the array's authority into his own steward's seal so that no message left the isolate without passing under his hand, and he did not explain the order because he did not have to. The station understood. The station had been bending its corridors into a wide, pale curve of avoidance for cycles now, and the locking of the array was only the last curve, the one that bent the truth itself the long way around the chamber. Vayan came to Thanel's cell in the low span. She did not speak until the door had sealed, and when she spoke it was in the flat fast register he had learned meant she had already made a decision and was only telling him where the two of them now stood. "There is a service channel," she said, "beneath the array. It carries the manifest reconciliations up the dark on a schedule Halth cannot fold into his seal, because folding it would break the reconciliation and the oversight nodes would read the break as exactly the kind of thing they are watching for. It is a thin channel. It carries numbers, not words, but numbers are a language, Osir, if you are willing to be read by an accountant." She set a small pale slate on the table between them. "I have been composing a reconciliation for 3 cycles. It says nothing a censor could catch. It only reports the true manifest, the personnel who have stopped drawing rations, the reclaim margins re-rated past the seal's rating, the isolation cells cycling, the consumption bending around one chamber. It reports the truth in the only tongue Halth cannot lock, because it is the tongue the whole consortium runs on." She looked at him. "An oversight accountant who reads it will understand within a cycle that this station has a containment failure of a kind the schema has a single response to. And that response is coming here regardless of what we do. I cannot stop the burn. No one can stop the burn once the numbers are read, but I can add one line to the reconciliation that the burn cannot erase." "What line?" Thanel said. "The specimen's intake string," Vayan said, "and a single flag, not an explanation, a flag. It marks her in the manifest as recoverable material of hazard order origin. It says in the cold tongue of the accounting that there is on this station one asset that predates the containment failure, that is the source of the data the whole program exists to gather, and that a burn destroys without recovering." She held his gaze. "It will not save us, Osir. Understand that. It will not save the station, and it will not save you, and it will almost certainly not save me. But an accountant reading a burn order will always pause on a line that says recoverable material of hazard order origin, because the one thing the consortium fears more than a contaminated station is the waste of a resource it cannot replace. They will not send the burn until they have sent something to recover her first. And a recovery craft is a thing that comes aboard, and a thing that comes aboard is a thing we can put her on." Thanel understood then what Vayan had built in 3 cycles in the vault. She had not built an escape. There was no escape. She was too honest to pretend there was. She had built a delay, a single cold line in the manifest that would make the consortium's accountants hesitate over the burn just long enough to send a recovery craft, and a plan to put the one person on the station who had never asked to be there onto that craft before the fire came down. "You are going to save her," Thanel said, "not us her." "I'm going to save the only person on this station who has not earned the burn," Vayan said. "Everyone else here built the thing that is killing us, or ordered it built, or stood the gallery for it and kept the log. You kept the log, Osir. I ran the immune arts line. We are the program. She is the one thing the program did to someone else." She was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again her voice had gone very low. "I have spent my whole career studying the immune arts of the wild, because I thought the consortium had thrown away something it would one day need. I was right. I only had the shape of it wrong. I thought we had thrown away a defense. We threw away the thing that lets a body be in a room with what it does not understand and come out changed instead of dead. We threw away the capacity to learn from the inside. And she has it, and we do not. And the whole of what is about to happen to this station is the price of that trade, 40,000 years late. The least I can do, the very least, is not add her to the bill." They sent the reconciliation up the thin service channel that cycle, and it carried its cold true numbers into the dark, and among the numbers, small and flagged, went the single line that would make an accountant pause. The relief team never docked. Thanel would learn why later, and the why would be the coldest number in the whole accounting. The oversight nodes, reading Vayan's reconciliation, had understood the containment failure faster than even she had hoped, and had done the thing the schema said to do with a relief team headed into an uncleansable hazard. They had turned it back. They had not warned it or briefed it or explained. They had simply rerouted it and let it wander, because the consortium did not explain a burn to the people it was protecting from one. And in the place where the relief team had been on the manifest, a new craft appeared, small and fast and single-purposed, logged under a designation Vayan read aloud in the vault with something that was almost, on her cold, hard face, a kind of grief. "Recovery," she said. "They read the flag. They are sending a recovery craft for the specimen ahead of the burn." She looked at the designation, and then at Thanel. "It comes in 11 cycles. The burn order will trail it by a margin the schema calls prudent, long enough to confirm the recovery, short enough to leave no gap for the hazard to exploit. 11 cycles to the recovery, perhaps 13 to the fire." She set the slate down. "We have 13 cycles, Osir, and we are going to spend them getting one human out of a chair and onto a craft, past a steward who has locked the array and would rather burn with his clean story than let her leave it unavenged." Halth found out about the reconciliation on the 8th of those cycles, and he found out the way he found out everything, through the accounting, because the recovery craft's approach appeared on the same manifest traffic he watched, and a steward who saw a recovery craft inbound for a specimen he had not requested recovered understood at once that someone beneath him had spoken to the dark in a tongue he could not lock. He summoned Thanel, only Thanel. Thanel understood as he walked the long pale curve of the avoided corridors to the steward's cell, the summons of a man who had narrowed his account to its last 2 entries and meant to close one of them by hand. Halth was alone in the cell standing, because Halth did not sit, and the dark architecture moved slow under his fine pale skin now, slower than it had. And Thanel saw for the first time that the curator's own body had begun the quiet coming apart that had taken Ole and the others, that the thing loose in the station's air had reached even the steward's cell, even the man who had built it, and that Halth had known it for cycles and had said nothing, because saying it was a confession too. "You sent the numbers," Halth said. "It was not a question." "Vayan sent the numbers," Thanel said. "I stood with her while she sent them. If you are closing an account, curator, close it accurately. I would not have you die with a false entry." Something moved in the cloudy old eyes that might, on a warmer world, have been the ghost of respect. "You kept the log," Halth said. "The whole of it, plainly. I read it. Every cycle I read it." He turned one long pale hand over, the dark of it shifting slow beneath the skin. "You wrote that she is the least dangerous person on this station. You wrote that the danger is the shape of what we made. You wrote that a workshop does not attack anyone, it only makes, and that it was I who chose the weapon it would learn." He was quiet. "It is a good log, Osir. It is the best pathology I have read in 40 years. And it is going to burn with the rest of us, because the alternative is that it survives. And if it survives, then the story survives, the true story. The one where the consortium's finest work went into a chair and came back out as the thing that unmade us. And I have spent my whole life keeping worlds clean, and I will not let that story loose to contaminate the last clean thing I have, which is the record of what we are." "The record of what we are," Thanel said, "is going to be the record regardless of whether you burn it. Vayan sent the numbers. The oversight nodes have the true manifest. You cannot make the account clean by destroying the ledger curator. You can only make it clean by never having written it, and it is written in the dark, in a tongue you cannot lock. The story is already loose. It has been loose since the first loosing. The only thing left to decide is whether one person who never wrote a line of it burns with the rest." Halth looked at him for a long moment, and the blue light moved in the slow dark beneath his skin, and Thanel understood that he was watching a man do, at the very end, the one sum he had spent his whole life refusing to work. "You want the specimen on the recovery craft," Halth said. I want the one person on this station who is not the program to leave before the fire, Thanel said. Yes. And if I let her leave, Halth said, then the consortium recovers alive, a body that turns our finest weapon into the instrument of our own unmaking. You understand what you are asking me to permit. You are asking me to send home the very thing Quietus was built to prevent, a living hazard order source, loose, intact, carrying in her flesh the proof that we cannot touch her kind and they can unmake us with our own hands. You are asking me to make the burial mean nothing. To hand the deathworlds the last laugh, that they did not even have to fight us. We did it to ourselves in a sealed room, and then we drove one of their young ones to the door and helped her out and asked her to remember us kindly. I am asking you, Thanel said, to let one person live who did not earn the fire, that is all. The rest of the account is closed whichever way you choose. She does not change the story. She only changes whether it has a survivor who is innocent of it. He held the old man's cloudy gaze. You have kept a great many worlds clean, curator. Keep this one small thing clean. Let the innocent one out. Halth did not answer him in the cell. He turned away to the pale wall where a single pane showed the schematic of the station he had built and was losing, and he stood with his back to Thanel, the slow dark moving under his skin, and after a long while he said, without turning, "The recovery craft carries consortium authority. It supersedes my seal at the dock. I could not stop it if I wished to. You have not come to ask my permission, Ossier. You have come to ask my forgiveness, and you will not have it because I have none left to give. I have spent it all, 40,000 years of it, keeping worlds clean, and there is none in the account." He was quiet. Take her to the dock. The pod will not carry crew. The oversight nodes are not fools. They will not send clean bodies into an uncleansable air. It will come empty, and it will leave with one thing aboard, and it will carry the hazard home sealed inside itself, which is the only clean way anything leaves this station now. Take her. Put her on it. I will not stop you. Then, still without turning, and do not come back to this cell. I would like to close my account alone. Thanel left him there, standing with his back to the door, watching the schematic of his dying station, and he did not see the curator again alive. The extraction took 2 cycles, because there was no protocol for it and everything had to be built as they went, and building things as they went was the one art the consortium had never taught its people. Vayan built it anyway. She built a sealed transit path from Chamber 9 to the recovery dock, cycling the reclaim locks in a sequence no one had ever run, drawing on 40,000 years of containment engineering to do the one thing that engineering had never been asked to do, not to keep a hazard in, but to walk a hazard, gently, intact, out. She worked without sleep, which her people could do, and she worked with a precision Thanel found he could not watch without something turning over in him that had no clean name, because he understood that she was building the path with the last of her own strength. The slow coming apart had reached her too. It had reached all of them. The station was full of the thing they had made, and there was no corner of it clean, and Vayan built the humans' road out of the station while her own body quietly failed under the same air, and she did not once mention it, because mentioning it would have been a confession, and she had decided, Thanel saw, to spend what she had left on the road and not on the grief. They opened Chamber 9 on the 2nd cycle. It was the first time in the whole program that the chamber had been opened with the human in it, and Thanel stood at the reclaim lock as the seal cycled and the wall of glass drew back, and he watched the small, ordinary figure rise from the ordinary chair for the first time, and he found he did not know what to say to her, because there was no protocol for this either, no clean sentence for the moment. A people's finest weapon walks out of the box on its own 2 legs, alive, unhurried, entirely unbroken. The human named Ren stepped out of the chamber. She was smaller standing than she had looked in the chair, and dirtier. The cycles had marked her, dust and the faint dry salt of a body that had worked hard and not been allowed to clean itself. A thin scratch healed pale along one forearm, and she stood in the pale corridor and looked at the 2 Sethier who had come to walk her out, and she read them the way she read everything, in a single cold level sweep, and Thanel watched her understand without a word that both of them were dying. "You're both breathing it," she said. It was not a question. She had a way of stating the thing she had already worked out. "We are the program," Vayan said. "We do not leave. There is one seat on the craft, and it is not for the people who built the fire." She turned, already moving, already spinning, one hand pressed briefly to the wall to steady a body that would not steady much longer. "This way. The path is cycled and it will not hold forever. Walk between us and touch nothing, and we will have you at the dock before the reclaim recovers." The human did not move. "You built the fire," she said to Vayan, level and cold. "So walk out of it, both of you. There's one seat and 3 of us, and I've been doing rescue math since I was 19. The pod's sealed. It carries the hazard home inside itself," you said. "I'm the hazard. My body's the thing that makes the air deadly to you. So put me in the sealed pod, and you two ride the outside of it, or the hold of it, or whatever it's got, sealed off from me, and the pod that was going to carry one thing home carries 3, and 2 of them get out of the air that's killing them." She looked between them, flat, patient, doing the sum out loud the way she did everything. "That's not a hard problem. You just have to want to solve it more than you want to punish yourselves for building the box, which I've watched you people for a month now. That's the actual hard part, isn't it? Not the engineering. The wanting to live after what you did." Thanel stood in the pale corridor and looked at the small, dirty human who had never once, in a month of loosings, lifted a hand against any of them, who had watched a technician die of her own breath and stated it as fact without heat, who had been told by the wind man himself that she was a factory unmaking his species, and had answered by telling him to sit down, and who now, at the door of her own way out, had stopped to work the rescue math for the 2 people dying of the weapon she had been brought here to prove. "The pod will not carry 3, Vayan said, but she said it slowly, and Thanel heard the specialist in her already turning it over, already finding the seams. "The pod will carry 3 if you build it to," the human said. "You cycled a transit path nobody's ever run, off the top of your head in 2 days, dying the whole time. Don't tell me you can't seal a hold. You people can seal anything. It's the only thing you were ever actually good at." She said it without cruelty, the way she said everything, and it landed harder than cruelty would have. "You spent 40,000 years learning how to keep things apart. Use it for once to keep somebody alive. Me sealed in, you sealed out, all 3 of us pointed home. Then figure out the rest when you're not breathing your own poison." It should not have worked. Thanel would set that down plainly in the log, the last long entry, the one that went out in the dark aboard the pod. It should not have worked, and it worked, because Vayan was the finest containment engineer the consortium had produced in a generation, and she had, at the very end, one thing to seal that was worth the sealing. She rebuilt the pod's accounting in the margin the recovery had left her. One sealed cell for the hazard order source, the human, alive and intact and carrying in her flesh the answer to everything. And around it, sealed off, drawing separate air the pod carried for exactly the clean bodies it had been designed to spare, room for 2 more, if the 2 more were small and still and willing to spend the whole journey home not breathing the same air as the thing in the cell. Thanel went back for the log while Vayan built it. It was the one thing he would not leave. He carried it down the long pale curve of the avoided corridors, past the chambers gone quiet, past the isolation cells that had cycled and stopped cycling, and he passed, on the way, the gallery of Chamber 9, and he looked in because he could not look, and Asinholth was there. The curator had gone back to the gallery to close his account. He stood at the rail where he had stood for the first loosing in the blue light, looking down at the empty chamber and the empty chair, and the slow dark had nearly stopped moving under his fine pale skin. He did not turn when Thanel entered. Perhaps he could not. He was very near the end of it, the quiet, orderly coming apart, the same clean unmaking he had built to inflict on a world, running now in the body that had drawn it. And he had chosen to spend the last of it here, at the rail, looking at the empty chair where the animal in the box had sat and stayed alive, and undone him without ever once raising her hand. "She is leaving," Thanel said. "Vayan is building her a way out, and a way out for herself and for me." "I know," Halth said. His voice had gone thin, the liturgical cadence worn down to a whisper, but it did not shake, because Halth's voice had never in his life shaken, and it was not going to start at the end. "I have watched the manifest. The pod that was to carry one thing home will carry three. Two of them the program and one of them the innocent." He was quiet a long moment, looking down at the empty chair. "You solved it the Deathworld way, Asir. Do you know that? You looked at a problem with one seat and three bodies, and instead of accepting the arithmetic you rebuilt the seat. That is her arithmetic. That is the arithmetic of a species that walked up out of a 4-billion-year war and decided the war was not a reason to die but a design to improve. You have caught it from her. You have been in the room with her too long, and you have caught the one thing our people cut out of ourselves 40,000 years ago, and you are going to carry it home in a sealed pod, and it is going to be the most dangerous thing that has ever crossed the black boundary in either direction." He turned his head at last and looked at Thanel, and the cloudy old eyes held something Thanel had never seen in them, not fear, not even grief, but a kind of terrible clarity, the clarity of a man who has finally, at the very end, worked the sum he spent his whole life refusing. Not the hazard in the cell, you, the thing you have become. A Sethir who learned from the inside that being in the room with what you do not understand can change you instead of killing you. We spent 40,000 years arranging never to learn that, and I brought the teacher into the cleanest room we ever built and set her in a chair. His head turned back to the empty chamber. "Go, carry your log, carry your dangerous new arithmetic, and do not tell them when you are home that I relented at the end. I did not relent. I only ran out of clean story, and there is a difference, and I would like the record you keep so plainly to keep that part plain too." Thanel stood in the gallery a moment longer. There was no clean sentence for it, and so he did not reach for one. He inclined his head, the old gesture, the one his people gave a thing they respected and could not save, and he left the curator at the rail, looking down at the empty chair, and he did not look back, and that was the last of Asin Halth, a steward at his post, closing his account alone, unmade by the finest weapon his people ever built, in the cleanest room they ever sealed, which he had filled with the one thing in the catalog dark that could not be cleaned. The human was already at the dock when Thanel reached it. She stood beside the recovery pod, small and dirty and still, watching Vayan make the last seals, and she looked up when Thanel came in with the log held against him, and she took him in the log, the way he carried it, the way a dying man carries the one thing he means to outlive him. And she nodded, once, the way she nodded when a reading came out the way she had already trusted it would. "You kept a record," she said. "The whole of it," Thanel said, plainly. "It is the only clean thing I have left." "Good," the human said. "Somebody should, not for us. For the next people your wind man sends to do this again somewhere else, to somebody else's kid in somebody else's chair." She looked at the log and then at him, and the flat cold face did something small at the edges that was not quite warmth, because the consortium had no clean word for warmth, but was in the same country as it. "You want to know the thing your people never got the whole time, all month. You kept calling my body a factory, a weapon factory, like it was doing something to you." She stepped up into the sealed cell of the pod and turned and looked back out at the two dying scholars who had built her a way home. "It wasn't doing anything to you. It never was. It was just staying alive in a box full of poison, the only way a body like mine knows how. The factory was never the weapon. You were. You built the poison. You built the box. You built a whole civilization with no way to survive its own worst idea, and then you had the worst idea and you brought me in to watch." She settled into the cell, and Vayan's last seal began to close between them. "I just sat there. That's all I ever did. I sat in your chair and I breathed and I stayed. And it turned out that was the most dangerous thing anybody had ever done to you, because you'd forgotten a body could just not die. You forgot on purpose, 40,000 years ago. The seal closed to a hand's width. "So write that down too, Doctor. The weapon was never in the room until you carried it in. And her name wasn't the one on the specimen string." The pod undocked from the isolate on the second cycle, and the station fell away behind it into the dark, and Thanel watched it go from the sealed hold Vayan had built. Through the one small pane the pod allowed him, and he understood that he was looking at the grave of 9 years and everyone still aboard it. He had thought when the human worked her rescue math at the door that the rebuilt seat was a salvation. It was not. He set that down plainly in the log because it was true, and because the human herself had told him not to make it prettier than it was. The rebuilt seat did not save Vayan, and it did not, in the end, save him. It only changed where they would die and in whose company, and pointed toward what. The station air had reached them both too deeply, in the cycles of the extraction, in the long unsealed work of building the humans' road out. The pod's clean air could keep new poison from them, but it could not take back what a body had already begun to lose, and both their bodies had begun to lose it. Vayan had known that when she built the hold. She had built a way home for 2 people who would not live to walk out of it, and she had built it anyway, because the point had never been their survival. The point had been the human and the log, and the account reaching the dark intact. The seat for the 2 of them was, Thanel understood, Vayan's one concession to the human's arithmetic, not because she believed it would save them, but because the human had looked at the problem and refused to accept that it had only one seat, and Vayan, at the very end of a long, hard, clean life, had decided she would rather die inside the deathworld arithmetic than the consortium's. Vayan went out on the 4th cycle of the journey, in the sealed hold in the quiet, orderly way, and Thanel was with her, on the clean side of the seal, and she did not waste the last of it on grief. "Keep the log going," she said. Her voice had worn down to almost nothing, but it did not shake because the specialist in her would not permit a shaking voice even now. "All the way in. They will want to burn it with the rest when you reach the nodes, the whole account, the true one, because the true one is a contamination worse than any agent. It is the story that the consortium's finest arts went into a chair and came out as our unmaking, and they will want that story cleaned the way Halth wanted it cleaned." One of her 4 hands moved weakly toward the pane where the human sat sealed in her cell, small and still and alive. "Do not let them clean it. That is the last thing I will ask of you, Osir, not because the story shames us, because the next steward on the next station over the next chair needs to read what happened here before he loosens the first loosing. Halth thought the shame was the contamination. He had it backward to the end. The shame is the cure. Let them read the shame. Let it get into them. Let it change them from the inside the way she changed you. It is the only immune art our people have left, the memory of what our worst idea cost us, and a memory is no good sealed in a vault. It has to be in the air where it can reach somebody." She was quiet a while, and then, so low Thanel had to lean to the seal to catch it, she rebuilt the seat. "Did you see it, Osir? 3 of us and 1 seat, and she rebuilt the seat. 40,000 years, and we never once thought to rebuild the seat. We only ever argued about who got to sit in it." Her hand went still. "Rebuild the seat. That is all it ever was. Tell them that if they will hear it. Rebuild the—" She did not finish it. Thanel kept the log going, all the way in, and he wrote her last unfinished sentence into it exactly as she left it, because the plainest true thing he could do was refuse to complete a sentence she had not lived to close. The consortium burned the isolate on the 9th cycle of the pod's journey home. Thanel did not see it. The pod was long past the station by then, running the dark toward the oversight nodes, and the burn was a thing he read later, in the cold accounting, the way he had read everything. A station struck from the manifest, a hazard designation closed, a line drawn clean through 9 years of the consortium's finest work and everyone who had built it. They did it from a great and sterile distance, the way the schema said to do it, removing the ground the hazard grew from, and the hazard they were removing was their own. Their agent, their reclaim, their sealed and blind and defenseless architecture, and the bodies of the scholars who had made it, and the steward at the rail who had chosen to close his account there. The consortium's answer to a thing it could not clean had only ever been one thing, and in the end it had turned that answer on itself, and struck from the record the whole of quietus, and told itself the record was clean. It was not clean. Thanel carried the part that was not clean sealed in a pod running the dark, and the part that was not clean had two components, and he thought about both of them across the long cycles alone now, dying slowly, keeping the log. The first was the log itself, the plain true account, kept cycle by cycle, of how the consortium's finest weapon had gone into a chair and come out as the instrument of its own maker's unmaking. Vayan had asked him not to let them clean it, and he would not, and he had already worked out how. He had folded it, in the tongue Halth could not lock, into the pod's own reconciliation, so that to erase the account the oversight nodes would have to break the manifest, and a broken manifest was the one thing a consortium accountant could not permit. The shame would ride home in the numbers, where it could not be sealed. It would reach somebody. Vayan had spent her last strength making sure of it, and Thanel meant to spend his making sure of it too. The second component was in the sealed cell at the heart of the pod, small and dirty and alive, and the consortium had a decision to make about her, and Thanel had had a long time to think about what they would decide, and he had arrived, in the dark, at a cold certainty about it that he set down in the log as his last real finding. They would send her home. He worked it the way he worked everything, plainly from the facts. The consortium had in the sealed cell the single most dangerous object it had ever recovered, a living hazard order body that had taken the finest weapon the consortium ever built and turned it, without effort, without intent, without ever once leaving a chair, into the instrument that unmade a station and everyone on it. What did a people do with a thing like that? Study it. They had studied it. The studying had killed a station. Contain it. They had contained it in the cleanest room they ever sealed, and the containment had failed the way all containment must fail against a body that generates rather than merely suffers. Destroy it. Thanel had thought about that longest, because destroy was the consortium's oldest reflex, the burn, the clean line through the record, and he had arrived, coldly, at the reason they would not. You could not safely destroy a body that turned everything you did to it into a design to improve upon. Every prior loosing had made her body richer and quicker and more terrible. What would a burn make of her? The consortium did not know. And a people who had built their whole civilization on the horror of the uncontained could not bring themselves to do a thing whose outcome they could not model to a hazard whose entire nature was to make the unmodelable out of whatever you brought it. They would not risk it. They would not gamble the schema on the hope that a fire was one more thing her kind could not learn from. So they would do the one thing left, the coldest thing, the thing that was not mercy and not defeat but only the last clean move on a board where every other move had been played and lost. They would give her back. They would carry the small dangerous alive thing back down the dark to the small blue furnace it had come from, and they would set it down at the edge of some fire on the night side of the world, where its absence had read as one more animal lost to the world it lived in, and they would draw the black boundary a little heavier on the chart, and they would go home, and they would never, ever come near a Hazard Order 9 body again, because they had learned. At the cost of a station and 9 years and Asin Halth's whole clean story, the one thing the Deathworlds had been trying to teach the catalog dark since the first survey drone grew a skin of the world's organisms in 11 hours on the ground. You did not weaponize the wild. You did not test your finest death on the thing that treated death as a template. You did not bring a hazard order body into your cleanest room and set it in a chair and pour your worst idea into the air it breathed, because it would simply breathe and stay, and its body would do what 4 billion years had built it to do, and it would hand your worst idea back to you refined into the shape of your own end, and it would not even hate you while it did. Thanel kept the log all the way in, and the pod reached the oversight nodes on the long cycle, and he delivered the human and the account, and the truth folded in the numbers where it could not be cleaned, and he did it in the last strength he had, because the coming apart had nearly finished with him by then. He did not resist it. He had watched the human do the thing his people had forgotten how to do, be in a room with what she did not understand and come out changed instead of dead, and he could not do it, because his people had cut out the organ that did it 40,000 years ago, and he was not bitter about that in the end. He was only clear. He had caught from her, in a month at a rail, the one thing the consortium had spent 40,000 years arranging never to catch, and it had not saved his body, but it had saved his account, and he found, in the last of it, that he was content to have kept a plain true record even though the keeping cost him everything, because a plain true record was the only immune art his people had left, and someone had to leave it in the air where it could reach the next steward over the next chair. He wrote the last entry himself before the nodes took the pod, and he wrote it plainly, because plainness was all he had ever had, and it was almost gone. "The specimen is intact," he wrote. "She was never the danger. I have said this in every entry, and I will say it in the last one. She sat in the chair, and she breathed, and she stayed alive, and staying alive was the whole of what she did, and it was the most dangerous thing that has ever been done to my people, because we had forgotten that a body could refuse to die and be changed by the refusing. We forgot on purpose. We called the forgetting cleanliness. She reminded us. It cost us a station, and it cost us Half's clean story, and it cost the finest weapon we ever built, which she took from us and made into the shape of our own end without lifting her hand or raising her voice or hating us for a single cycle of the month we kept her in the dark. Give her back. It is the only clean move left, and it is not mercy, and she would not want it called mercy. Give her back and draw the boundary heavier and never come near her kind again. And do not clean this log. Let it get into the air. Let it reach the next one. It is the only cure we have." Thanel died at the oversight nodes in the pod before they unsealed it, and so he did not see with his own eyes what the consortium did with the account and the human he had carried home. But he had folded the log into the manifest where it could not be cleaned, and a log that cannot be cleaned is a thing that goes on speaking after the one who kept it is stopped, and the rest of it is a matter of record, and the record was read in the end by a clerk of the oversight named Cecil Ormran, who was young and careful, and who had never in her life expected to be the one to open a sealed pod come back from a burned station with a hazard order body alive inside it, and a dead pathologist's log wound all through the numbers. She read the log first. She was supposed to process the recovery before she read anything. That was the schema, hazard before narrative, containment before understanding. But she read the log first, because the log was folded into the manifest she had to reconcile before she could do anything at all, and to reconcile it she had to read it, and by the time she had read it she was no longer the clerk who had begun the shift. That was the thing about the log. Half had been right to fear it and wrong about why. It was not a shame that soiled the reader. It was a memory that changed her. She read the plain, true account of a young woman in a chair who breathed her people's worst idea for a month and stayed alive and undid a station without lifting her hand. And she read the last entry. Give her back. Do not clean this log. Let it get into the air. And Cecil Ormran sat at the oversight node for a long while with her glands shut and the dark architecture moving slow under her fine pale skin. And then she did the thing the log had asked, which was the first genuinely dangerous thing anyone in the oversight had done in a generation. She let it reach the ones above her. The consortium convened over it. In the cold way, the consortium convened over everything, and Cecil was not in the room where they convened, because she was only a clerk, but she processed the record of it afterward, and the record was itself a kind of account, and she read that too, and what she read was a civilization doing slowly, coldly, at great height, the same some Thanel had done alone in the dark of the pod. They had the most dangerous object they had ever recovered. They had studied it and the studying had killed a station. They had contained it and the containment had failed. And they turned, as the schema turned, toward the burn, and they stopped, exactly where Thanel had said they would stop, on the one fact that no amount of height or cold could clean away. You could not safely destroy a body that turned everything done to it into a design to improve. They had a station's worth of evidence for it. 9 loosings, each one making her body richer and quicker and more terrible. They did not know what a burn would make of her, and they could not model it, because her entire nature was to make the unmodelable out of whatever you brought her. And a people built on the horror of the uncontained could not gamble the schema on the hope that fire was the one thing her kind could not learn. So they reached coldly at great height for the last clean move on the board. And before they made it, they did one other thing, one small bureaucratic thing that was, in its cold way, the largest thing the consortium had done in 40,000 years. They redrew the chart. Hazard Order 9 had been the ceiling of the schema for the whole of the consortium's history, the worst-case placeholder, the number no real world was expected to reach, until a small blue world reached it and broke the instrument. For all the cycles since, 9 had held, because 9 had been enough. A world that would grow a skin of its own organisms on a sterile hull in 11 hours was as bad as the schema had ever needed to imagine. But 9 was a measure of a world. It measured how fast a place would take a clean thing and unmake it. And what had happened at the isolate was not a measure of a world. It was a measure of what the world had made, of a body that did not merely unmake the clean thing but studied it, and answered it, and handed it back refined into the shape of your end. There was no number on the schema for that. The old scale ran out at the edge of the world's own lethality, and had never once needed to reckon with the lethality. A hazard order body could manufacture out of your own weapons if you were fool enough to hand it the design. So the consortium added a rung. It did it quietly, in the cold tongue of the accounting, the way it did everything that frightened it too much to say aloud. It drew a new line above 9 on the oldest chart it owned, a line that had never existed in 40,000 years of cataloging the wild, and it wrote against the small blue world under the yellow sun, a designation the schema had never carried before, and the designation meant, in the cold language of the oversight, a world whose native bodies will take your worst and return it as your worst, refined. A world you cannot weaponize against because it is itself the weapon, and every weapon you bring to it becomes, in its flesh, a weapon against you. A world at the top of a scale that had to be extended to hold it. Hazard Order 10. The first world ever to earn the rung, and the oversight noted in the cold margin of the record, in all likelihood the last, because the schema did not expect to survive the making of an 11th. And then they made the last clean move. They sent her home. Cecil Ormond processed the return order, because processing returns was a clerk's work and she was the clerk, and she found when she read it that her hands had gone still on the pane. The order was cold and complete and entirely without ceremony, the way consortium orders were, and it laid out the return the way it would have laid out the disposal of any hazard the schema could not otherwise resolve. Carry the object back down the dark to the world it came from. Set it down at the edge of the wild it had been taken from, where its absence had read as one more animal lost to the furnace it lived in. Draw the boundary heavier. Withdraw. And here the order did the one thing that told Cecil the log had reached all the way to the top and gotten into the air the way Vayan had wanted. It attached to the return the whole of Thanel's account, not sealed, not cleaned. Bound into the permanent record of the oversight, flagged for every steward, every immunist, every clerk who might ever again stand over a chair with a hazard order body in it and a beautiful terrible idea in hand. The order made Thanel's log a permanent part of the schema. It made give her back a rule. It made do not weaponize the wild a law, written in the cold tongue, in the place where the consortium kept the things it had learned at too high a price to ever unlearn. Cecil read the whole of it, And then she did the last thing the clerk of a return does, which was to confirm the object's condition before it went down the dark. And to do that she had to look at it. And so, for the first time, she opened the pane to the sealed cell where the recovered thing had ridden home, and she looked at the human. She had expected, she did not know what she had expected. A monster, perhaps, in the old sense, the way the Hazard archives taught the young to expect monsters of the wild. What she saw was a young woman, small and dirty, with a thin pale scratch healed along one forearm and dark hair gone lank with the cycles, sitting in the sealed cell with her back straight, and her hands loose and her eyes open, calm, level, awake. A person who had been carried across the black boundary in a sealed box come back from a burned station, who had breathed her captor's worst idea for a month and watched them die of it and been redrawn as the top rung of a chart that had to be extended to hold her. And who sat now in the cell with the stillness of a thing that had understood the situation completely a long time ago, and had simply been waiting, without heat, without haste, for the last of it to finish. The human looked up at the pane, and found it, with that uncanny animal accuracy, the exact place where the clerk stood. "You read it," the human said. The cell carried her voice up flat and cold in the barking tongue the translator rendered a half-beat late. "The doctor's record, I can tell. You've got the same look he got right at the end, like somebody handed you a fact that's too big to put down." She was quiet a moment. "He kept it plain. I asked him to, not for me. For the next one of you who gets a bright idea about a body like mine in a chair like this." She settled back against the wall of the cell. "You're sending me home, that's what the look is. You worked it all the way up the chain, and you did the math your whole civilization does, and it came out the one place it was ever going to come out, which is that the safest thing you can possibly do with me is put me back exactly where you found me and never come near my kind again." The flat, cold face did something small at the edges, not warmth, but in the country of it. "Took a station and 9 years and a good man's whole life to get you there. My people could have told you that for free if you'd knocked instead of grabbed. That's the part I'd write down if I were you, not what my body did. What it cost you to learn a thing you could have just asked." Cecil Ormrin, clerk of the oversight, stood at the pane with the dark moving slow under her skin and no clean sentence anywhere in her. And she did the only thing she had, which was the thing Thanel had done, the thing the human had taught a pathologist at a rail, and the pathologist had folded into a log, and the log had carried all the way up the dark to a clerk who was, by the time she read it, no longer the clerk who had begun the shift. She wrote it down. She opened the record, and beneath the cold, complete return order, in the place where a clerk was permitted to note the condition of a returned object, she wrote a single line that was not procedure, that no schema had asked for, that would ride home in the permanent account beside Thanel's log where it could not be cleaned. She wrote, "The object is calm." And then, because the log had gotten into her the way Vayan had wanted it to, she wrote the rest of what she saw, plainly, the way the dead pathologist had taught her without ever meeting her. She was calm the whole time. She was the only one who ever was. The return took 40 cycles down the dark, and the consortium sent no crew, because the consortium had learned at last the cost of putting a clean body in a sealed box with a hazard order thing. And so the craft that carried the human home was empty of everything but her, automated, sterile, running the long fall to the small blue world under the yellow sun with no living Sethier aboard to breathe the same air she breathed. Cecil Ormrin watched the whole of it from the oversight node, because she had asked to, and no one had refused her, because no one else wanted the work of watching a hazard order 10 body carried back across the black boundary was not work anyone reached for, and the clerk who had read the log and written the object is calm was, by then, the only one in the oversight who could look at the return without her glands shutting. She watched the craft cross the boundary on the 30th cycle. It was a line on a chart, the boundary, an old cold line the consortium had taught its children for 40,000 years as the edge of the permissible universe, and Cecil watched a small sterile craft with a young woman sealed inside it cross the line going the wrong way, inward, toward the wild, toward the furnace, carrying back into the forbidden dark the one thing that had ever come out of it into consortium hands, and she found, watching it, that she had begun to understand the boundary differently than she had been taught. She had been taught that the line kept the clean world safe from the wild. She understood now that the line had never done anything of the kind. The line only marked the place where the consortium had decided to stop looking. The wild had never respected it. The wild did not know it was there. A small blue world had grown a skin of its own organisms on a sterile hull in 11 hours, and had never once been told it was on the wrong side of anyone's line. And a young woman in a chair had taken the finest weapon a civilization could draw and made it into that civilization's end without ever hearing that a boundary existed. The line was not a wall. It was a confession. It was the mark of the exact place where the consortium had chosen, 40,000 years ago, to be a people who did not look at what they could not clean. The world came up on the 40th cycle, and Cecil looked at it, and she understood the surveyor's old flat horror in a way no archive had ever made her understand it. It was so alive. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was almost past bearing for a body raised on a clean world. The small blue world turned under its yellow sun, and every part of it was in motion, every part of it at war, the boiling green tangle of it, the white storms walking across the wide dark seas, the whole surface of it, a single 4-billion-year battle that had never once paused and never once would. And the consortium's instruments read it and reported it in the cold tongue, and the cold tongue had no words large enough. So the instruments simply climbed and climbed and climbed toward the top of every scale and sat there, pinned, the way the first drone's instruments had sat pinned, reporting a world that broke the reckoning by being too much itself. Cecil looked at it and she thought, they built a weapon to end this. They built a quiet poison to close this like a valve. A world 4,000 million years in the making, at war with itself since before the consortium's oldest record, every handful of its soil a battlefield older than everything the Sethier had ever built. And a steward with a wound in him had drawn 9 years of clean architecture and told himself he would close it like a valve. She understood, looking at the world, that quietus had never had a chance. It had been doomed not at the isolate, not in the chair, but 4 billion years before any Sethier drew a breath. On the day the small blue world became the kind of place that made bodies like the one sealed in the returning craft, bodies that did not survive the wild but were the wild, that carried the whole boiling war inside them and answered every death with a design. The craft entered the world's air on the night side, as the order specified, where the human's absence had read as one more animal lost to the furnace it lived in. Cecil watched it fall through the dark air toward the edge of a wild place, a broken country of stone and dry brush on the shoulder of a mountain, and she watched, on the craft's cold record, a distant orange light down in a fold of the land, a fire, a real one, the wild kind, the kind that walked a hillside eating everything it touched, the kind the human had told a pathologist at a rail that she put out for a living. The order had set the return point at the edge of the wild the human had been taken from, and the wild the human had been taken from was on fire, the way it had been on fire the night they took her, the way, Cecil understood, it was probably always on fire somewhere, because that was what a Hazard Order 10 world was, a place perpetually burning and perpetually answering the burn, a whole planet doing at its scale the exact thing the young woman had done in the chair. The craft set down at the edge of the burning country and cycled its one seal open, and for the first time in 41 cycles, the human breathed air that had not been carried in a sealed box, and Cecil watched her, on the cold record, step down out of the sterile craft onto the stone of her own impossible world. The human stood there a moment. She was small against the dark and the distant fire, small and dirty, the thin pale scratch on her forearm, the lank dark hair, and she looked up, not at the craft, not at the boundary, not at the cold sterile eyes of the oversight she could not have known were watching, but up at the black sky of her burning world, at the hard bright scatter of stars over the mountain, The way, Cecil thought. A person looks up who has come a very long way and is measuring without heat, without haste. The distance she has been carried. Then she looked back at the craft, at the empty, sterile thing that had brought her home, and she found, with the uncanny animal accuracy of her kind, the small, cold eye of the record, the exact place where a clerk of the oversight sat watching from 40 cycles up the dark. "I know you're still watching," the human said. The craft's record carried it up flat and cold. In the barking tongue the translator rendered a half-beat late, and it was the last thing any Sethier would ever hear a human say, and Cecil Ormond wrote it down. "You always were the type. So here's the last of it, for the record, since somebody up there finally started keeping one straight." She looked at the empty craft, and the distant fire moved orange in the fold of the land behind her. "You built a thing to kill everybody like me. You spent 9 years on it. You took me out of a fire on the worst night of a bad summer, and you put me in a chair, and you poured it into the air I breathed, over and over, the best you had. And I sat there and I breathed and I stayed alive, because that's the whole job, that's all it ever was. Stay calm, read the situation, don't waste motion, don't die. And it turned out that was enough to end you. Not because I fought. I never fought. I never touched one of you. I just wouldn't die on your schedule, and it turned out your whole civilization was built on everything dying on schedule, and when one thing didn't, the whole clean machine ran itself into the ground trying to make it." She was quiet a moment, and the fire burned, and the stars stood hard over the mountain. "You want to keep one thing straight in that record of yours, keep this. We're not the weapon. We never were. We're just hard to kill, and we don't rattle, and we make something out of whatever you put in front of us. That's the entire trick. That's the whole terrible secret, and you could have read it off any hillside on this planet if you'd ever once come down and looked instead of drawing a line and calling it the edge of the world." She turned, toward the fold of the land, toward the fire. "The weapon was always the thing you brought. Every time. You just kept handing it to the one kind of body that knows what to do with it. So stop coming. That's the whole lesson. Stop bringing us your worst and acting surprised when we hand it back. Draw your line heavier. Stay on your side of it. And leave the burning worlds to the people who know how to walk into a fire." Then she walked down off the stone, toward the orange light in the fold of the land, toward the wild fire on the shoulder of her impossible world, not away from it, Cecil noted, in the cold and careful way she had learned from a dead pathologist's log, not away from the fire but toward it, small and unhurried and entirely without fear, a person going back to the only work she had ever named for herself, which was to walk into the thing that was burning and pull the living out of it and stay calm while she did. And the craft's record held her until the dark and the smoke took her, a small dirty figure moving down toward the fire with her back straight and her hands loose, and then she was gone. Into the wild the consortium had spent 40,000 years arranging never to look at, and the record closed, and that was the last of her. Cecil Ormond sat at the oversight node for a long while after the record closed. Then she did the last of the clerk's work, which was to seal the account and enter it into the permanent record of the schema, bound to Thanel's log and Vayan's unfinished sentence, and the cold new rung on the oldest chart the consortium owned. She did not clean it. The order had forbidden the cleaning, and even if it had not, she would not have cleaned it, because the log had gotten into her the way it had gotten into the pathologist, and the clerk was no longer the clerk who had begun the shift. She sealed the true account, all of it, into the place where the consortium kept the things it had learned at too high a price to ever unlearn, and she flagged it for every steward and every immunist and every clerk who might ever again stand over a chair with a hazard order body in it and a beautiful terrible idea in hand. And beneath the cold complete record she wrote, in the place a clerk is permitted a single line, the thing the dead pathologist had taught her without ever meeting her. The thing the young woman had taught the pathologist at a rail, the thing the small blue world had been trying to teach the catalog dark since the first drone came home wearing a skin of the world's own life. She wrote, "We brought the weapon. Every time it was we who brought it." And she only ever did the one thing her world had built her to do, which was refuse to die and make something of what was left. We called her world the top of the chart because we had to invent a rung to hold it. But the chart was never measuring her. It was measuring us, how far clean people would go, and how much we would burn, and how completely we would unmake ourselves, before we would admit that the most dangerous thing in any room we ever built was the idea we carried into it. She sat in our worst and stayed calm and lived. That was all. That was everything. And the wisest thing my people ever did, in 40,000 years of arranging never to be in the room with the wild, was the cold last thing we did at the end of this. We opened the box, and we set her down at the edge of her fire, and we let the woman walk home.